Hey there, welcome to AI Storycraft. Here, we mix up AI-assisted storytelling with awesome AI-generated visuals to bring you fun, comic book-style stories. Whether you're into thrilling tales, cool art, or just curious about what AI can do, you're gonna love it here. Let's dive right into this episode's story, Beyond the Known.
The RV rumbled along the winding road, the salty scent of the Atlantic wafting through the open windows. A small town appeared on the horizon, shrouded in a light mist that clung to the rocky coastline. A wooden sign by the road read, "Welcome to Blackwater Cove," in faded, weathered letters. Lena, a fiery redhead with a knack for getting into trouble, leaned out the window, her hair whipping in the wind. "Hello, Blackwater Cove," she shouted, her voice echoing through the otherwise quiet streets. She flashed a mischievous grin at the others. Beside her, sitting on a leather couch inside the RV, was Jerry, the group's tech expert. With his thin glasses and trimmed beard, he was already fiddling with a drone that had the word "scoop" on each side of it. "Careful, Lena," he warned without looking up. "We don't want to scare the locals before we even get to meet them." In the driver's seat, Alex, the leader of the group and a former journalist, kept his eyes on the road. His calm demeanor and sharp instincts made him perfect for guiding the team through their strange adventures. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said with a smile. "Remember, we're here to investigate, not cause a stir." Sitting next to him was Marissa, the team's researcher and skeptic. With her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and an iPad open to an article about cryptids at her side, she adjusted her glasses and peered out at the town. "If there's anything here, it's been hiding well," she said. "But who knows? Maybe we'll be the first to catch it on camera." The RV rolled slowly into the heart of Blackwater Cove, the group eager to uncover the secrets the town had been hiding for generations. The team found a small park near the edge of Blackwater Cove, nestled close to the eerie waters of Blackwater Lake. The trees formed a natural barrier around the clearing, giving the RV a sense of privacy despite being just a short walk from the lake's dark, still surface. Alex guided the RV into a shady spot beneath a cluster of towering pines. "This'll do," he said, shutting off the engine. The group stepped out, stretching their legs after the long drive. Jerry immediately set up a small satellite dish on the roof of the RV, ensuring they'd have a strong signal for uploading videos. "Good spot for a base camp," he said, satisfied. Lena was already checking her camera, ready to start filming at a moment's notice. "I'm starving," she declared. "Let's find a place to eat and see if we can get some info on this creature. What was it called again? Murky?" Marissa nodded, looking through her notes. "Yeah, that's what some of the locals call it. Murky. Others say it's just the Blackwater beast. Apparently, no one can agree on what it even looks like." They walked into town, the streets lined with quaint shops and weathered buildings. The ocean breeze, faint but present, carried the scent of salt and fish, mixing with the earthy aroma of the surrounding woods. Though Blackwater Cove was about 20 miles from the Atlantic, the ocean's presence was still felt in the mist that often rolled in from the sea. They found a small diner near the center of town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The sign above the door read, "The Lighthouse Grill," and the inside was just as cozy and worn as the outside, with checkered tablecloths and walls adorned with old photos of fishermen and boats. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, drawing the attention of the few locals seated at the counter and booths. A waitress with graying hair and a warm smile greeted them. "Take a seat anywhere, folks. I'll be right with you." They chose a booth by the window where they could see the town's main street and the occasional passerby. As they waited for the waitress, Marissa pulled out her iPad and started jotting down observations. Lena scanned the room, her eyes landing on a group of older men at the counter, their conversation hushed but animated. When the waitress came over, Lena flashed a friendly smile. "Hi there, we're new in town. Heard about this place from some locals. Seems like a great spot." The waitress laughed. "It's the only spot, really. What brings you folks to Blackwater Cove?" Alex leaned in slightly, his voice casual. "We're here to shoot a documentary for our YouTube channel, Beyond the Known. We've heard there's something called Murky in Blackwater Lake, and we wanted to dig into the stories and see what's out there." At the mention of the creature, the men at the counter fell silent, exchanging glances. The waitress's smile faltered for a moment before returning. "You're here about Murky, huh? You're not the first, but you might be the first with a camera." One of the older men, a grizzled fisherman with a face weathered by years at sea, turned in his seat. "Ain't nothing but bullshit if you ask me," he grumbled. "Ain't no monster in that lake. Just a lot of bullshit." Another man, younger but equally rugged, shook his head. "That's what they say, but I seen something out there. Some say it's got tentacles like an octopus, but what I saw looked more like a giant eel slithering through the water. The waitress chimed in, leaning on the counter. My cousin swears it's got glowing eyes, like some kind of demon fish, but others say it's more like a big, shadowy figure that just lurks under the surface, watchin'. Lena's eyes lit up, and she exchanged a quick glance with Jerry, who was already mentally planning their drone shots. Sounds like we'll have to see for ourselves, she said. Any advice on where we should start? The older man shrugged. Start by not wasting your time, but if you're set on it, talk to old Mrs. Dunham. She lives up on the hill, near the lake. Claims she's seen Murky more than once. She'll talk your ear off if you let her. Marissa typed the name in her iPad, while Alex nodded gratefully. Thanks. We're just here to get the story, whatever it may be. Maybe there's a creature, maybe there's not. Either way, it'll make for a good episode. The waitress returned with their food, and the conversation shifted back to the weather and the town's history, but the group couldn't help but feel the weight of the mystery surrounding them, a sense of anticipation building, as they prepared to uncover the secrets of Blackwater Cove and its legendary Murky. After leaving the diner, the group strolled down the quiet street, the evening air cool against their skin. As they passed a dimly lit alley, two men stepped out, their eyes locking onto the expensive camera gear Alex was carrying. The taller of the two, a scruffy man with a cigarette hanging from his mouth, grinned and said, "Nice toys you got there, buddy. Bet those cost more than my truck. Maybe you need someone to keep an eye on them for you." His gaze shifted to Lena and Marissa, lingering on them with a sleazy smirk. "Or maybe you ladies need some company tonight. We could show you a real good time." Lena shot him a disgusted look, while Marissa tensed up, gripping her bag tighter. "We're fine, thanks," Lena snapped, her voice icy. The second man, shorter and stockier, with a greasy ball cap pulled low over his eyes, sidled closer to Marissa. "Ah, don't be like that, sweetheart," he crooned, his eyes roaming over her. "You look like you could use some of this," as he grabs his crotch. "How about you and me get to know each other a little better?" Alex's jaw clenched as he stepped forward, blocking the man's path. "Back off, asshole." Jerry moved beside him, ready to step in if needed. "We're not interested in whatever you're selling." The shorter man's grin faded, replaced by a sneer. "Who says I'm selling anything?" he shot back, his tone turning nasty. "You think you're better than us, boy? Just 'cause you got some fancy camera?" The taller man laughed crudely, his eyes fixed on Lena. "Come on, darling, don't let these ass clowns keep you from a good time. I bet you taste really sweet and juicy." Lena's temper flared, and she stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Say that again. I dare you, asshole." Marissa, usually the calm one, couldn't hide her anger. "Back off, both of you, before this gets worse." Just as the situation seemed ready to explode, a sheriff's patrol car rolled up, and a tall, stern-looking officer stepped out. "What the hell's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. His name badge read Sheriff Carter, and his hand rested on his belt, ready to draw if necessary. The two men immediately backed off, mumbling half-hearted excuses. "Just talking, Sheriff. Nothing to worry about," the shorter man said, raising his hands defensively. Sheriff Carter's eyes narrowed. "I said, what's going on here?" The taller man shot the shorter man a look, and then scowled at the group. "Nothing, Sheriff. We're leaving." "Damn right you are," Carter said, his tone firm. "Get moving, and don't let me see you bothering folks again." The two men shot one last glare at the group before slinking off into the darkness. Sheriff Carter turned to Alex and the others, his expression softening slightly. "You folks good?" Those two are Ray and Frank. They have been thick as thieves since high school, always causing trouble wherever they go. Might be best if y'all move alone and avoid those two. "Thanks, Sheriff," Alex said, his voice still tense. "We're heading back to our RV now." With a nod from the sheriff, they continued down the street, the earlier excitement from the diner replaced by a tense silence. They made their way back to the safety of their RV, the night's unsettling encounter lingering in their minds as they prepared for the documentary's investigation. Alex turned to the group, his expression thoughtful. "Forget those douchebags, we got work to do. Here's the plan. Jerry, I want you and Marissa to get some establishing shots of the lake, the woods, and the town. Make sure to capture the atmosphere. Get those eerie vibes we talked about. Lena and I are going to visit Mrs. Dunham and see what she has to say about Murky." Jerry nodded, already thinking about which angles would best capture the mysterious aura of Blackwater Cove. "Got it. We'll make it look like something's lurking just out of sight." Marissa tucked her iPad into her bag and grabbed her camera. "I'll focus on the lake first," she said. "If there's anything out there, it might show itself as the sun goes down." Alex gave them a nod of approval before turning to Lena. "Ready to meet the town's resident Murky expert?" Lena grinned, slinging her camera over her shoulder. "Let's see what she's got." The group split up, with Jerry and Marissa heading towards the lake, while Alex and Lena took the narrow path that led up the hill to Mrs. Dunham's house. The old woman lived in a weather-beaten cottage. Perched on a rise overlooking the lake, the place looked as old as the town itself, with peeling paint and a garden overrun with wildflowers and weeds. As they approached, Lena nudged Alex. "This place is straight out of a horror movie," she whispered, half joking, but with a hint of unease. Alex gave a small, tense smile. "Let's hope it's just as atmospheric on camera." They reached the front door and knocked. After a moment, they heard the shuffling of feet and the creak of old floorboards. The door opened to reveal Mrs. Dunham, a thin woman with wild gray hair and eyes that seemed too sharp for her age. She wore a faded dress that might have been in style decades ago, and her fingers, twisted with age, clutched the doorframe. "You're here about Murky," she said, her voice a rasp that matched her appearance. "Yes, ma'am," Alex replied, keeping his tone respectful. "We're doing a documentary about the legend. We were told you've seen the creature yourself?" Mrs. Dunham's eyes narrowed, as if judging whether they were worthy of hearing her tale. After a long pause, she stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Come in then. But you listen good. Ain't no one else around here knows Murky like I do." The inside of the house was cluttered with old furniture, dusty books, and strange trinkets. The air was thick with the scent of must and something else, something metallic, like the smell of damp earth after a storm. Mrs. Dunham led them to a small sitting room and motioned for them to sit. "I've seen Murky many times," she began, her voice low and intense. "First time was when I was just a girl. They say Murky's as old as the lake itself, but I think it's older. It's a creature from another time, maybe even another world." Lena, trying to keep her skepticism in check, asked, "What does Murky look like?" Mrs. Dunham leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling fervor. "Murky's about 40 feet long, give or take. Got these short, stumpy legs, almost like a lizard's, but thicker. Its skin is scaly, like a crocodile's, but black as night, with a silverish-white underbelly that glows in the moonlight. It's got spikes running down its back and tail, sharp enough to cut through bone, and its head, long, with teeth like knives. Eyes as black as the water it hides in." Lena exchanged a quick glance with Alex, who remained focused on Mrs. Dunham. "That sounds terrifying," he said, "but no one else has seen it as clearly as you?" Mrs. Dunham's expression darkened. "Oh, they've seen it all right, but they don't want to admit it. They're scared. They know Murky's out there, watchin', waitin', but they'd rather call it nonsense, say it's all bullshit, than face the truth. But I've seen it close enough to touch, almost." There was a silence, heavy and awkward, as Alex considered his next words. "Why do you think Murky hasn't been caught on camera before? With all the technology people have these days?" Mrs. Dunham gave a dry, humorless laugh. "Murky's too smart for that. It knows when it's being watched. Stays hidden, deep down in the lake, where no light can reach. But it's there, all right. It's always there." Lena shifted in her seat, uneasy with the intensity of the old woman's belief. "Well, we're hoping to get some footage of the lake tonight. Maybe we'll get lucky." Mrs. Dunham fixed her with a sharp gaze. "Luck won't do you no good. If Murky wants to show itself, it will. If not, well, you'll just be wasting your damn time, like all the others." Alex stood, sensing the conversation had reached its end. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Dunham. We appreciate your insight." Mrs. Dunham nodded, but her eyes lingered on them as they made their way to the door, a strange glint in her gaze that left them both feeling unsettled. As they stepped back outside into the cooling evening air, Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was intense." Alex nodded, glancing back at the cottage. "She's definitely a character, but if there's any truth to what she's saying, we're in for a hell of a story." The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of salt water from the nearby shore. As the group sat around the weathered picnic table, a small lantern sat in the middle, casting a warm, flickering glow on their faces. The day's events weighed on their minds, each of them replaying moments in their heads. Alex leaned back, eyes scanning the dark horizon. "I still can't get over Mrs. Dunham," he said, shaking his head. "That woman is convinced Murky's been around since she was a kid." "Yeah, and Ray and Frank," Lena added, leaning forward, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. "Those two are the biggest perverted creeps I've ever met in any town we've visited. I think they're a lot worse than the sheriff realizes." Marissa nodded, agreeing with Lena about Ray and Frank, but then changing the subject back to Murky. "The town is split for sure. Some of them are so convinced that Murky's out there, while the others think it's all a bunch of horse shit." Just then, the sound of light footsteps on gravel caught their attention. Out of the shadows emerged two children, a spunky boy around 11 years old, and his energetic 8-year-old sister. The boy had a mischievous grin on his face, while the girl's wide eyes sparkled with excitement. "Hey, Aren't you guys from YouTube? The boy asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Lena smiled, recognizing the enthusiasm in their eyes. Yeah, we are. We're here looking for Murky. The boy puffed out his chest proudly. I'm Tommy, and this is my sister Lily. We've seen Murky. Marissa raised an eyebrow. You have? Where? Tommy leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if sharing a secret. On the other side of the woods, in the lake's main channel. It was just over a year ago. Lily nodded vigorously, her pigtails bouncing. We saw a bunch of fish bubble up to the top of the water, and then Murky ate them. Lena blinked. He ate them? Lily grinned. Yep, like chicken nuggets. Before anyone could ask more, a distant voice echoed through the night. Tommy! Lily! Where are you? The kids jumped up, realizing they'd lingered too long. We gotta go, Tommy said, grabbing Lily's hand. They dashed toward their home, just outside the park to the left. As they ran off, the group could faintly hear their mother's voice again, scolding them. You two know better than that. Never talk to strangers. But we've seen them on YouTube, Mom. Lily's voice carried through the night as they disappeared into the darkness. The group exchanged glances, the encounter leaving them with more questions than answers. Then Alex said, Well, I guess we should turn in if we're going to get an early start. The group agreed. Lena then added, It's such a beautiful night. I think I'll set up my tent and sleep out here. Jerry nodded. I was thinking the same. Alex and Marissa decided they'd rather sleep in the RV. Jerry grabbed his luxury pop-up tent and set it up about 20 feet from the RV, while Lena set hers up about 5 feet from his, with her zip-up door facing Jerry's. They all went to their beds. About 30 minutes later, Lena quietly unzipped her tent and began tossing small pebbles at Jerry's door, whispering, Jerry, hey Jerry! Jerry opened his tent door to find Lena looking at him with a naughty smile. She lifted her shirt, flashing him her tits. Jerry grinned, glanced up at the RV to ensure the lights were out and no one was watching, then slipped over to Lena's tent. Softly grabbing the side of her head, he whispered, You're a bad, bad girl, before kissing her deeply. He then slid all the way inside her tent and zipped the door closed behind him. The next morning, the sun crept over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the campsite. Jerry was back in his own tent, stirring awake as the sounds of birds filled the air. Alex was already up, getting things going for the day. We should get an early start, Alex said, stretching his arms. Marissa and I will hike through the woods to the lake's main channel. Those kids might not have actually seen anything, but if Murky's lurking anywhere, the main channel makes sense. Lena, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, nodded. Sounds good. I'll stay here and take a lot of pictures of the lake, the park, the woods, and the town. We'll need plenty of visuals. Jerry grinned, heading toward the RV to retrieve his high-tech camera drone, which had Scoop written on the side in bold letters. I'll get plenty of drone footage of the lake and the woods, he said. Lena glanced at the drone. Why do you call it Scoop, anyway? Jerry smiled. It's named that because it always helps us get the inside scoop on what's really going on. This thing's captured everything from wild animals to weather phenomena. If Murky's out there, Scoop will find it. With that, Alex and Marissa grabbed their gear and headed off into the woods, while Lena and Jerry prepared for their tasks. The day was just beginning, and the air was thick with the promise of discovery. Alex and Marissa began their hike to the other side of the woods. As they set off, Alex reminded her, We don't know these woods, so let's stick to the paths others have created. Marissa nodded, adjusting her shirt and buttoning the top button. The lake's main channel is about 4 miles from here. It shouldn't take us too long to get there. Back at the RV, Jerry was busy getting Scoop ready for flight. As Lena approached, he glanced around to make sure Alex and Marissa were out of sight. Then, with a quick smile, he leaned in and kissed her, whispering, Last night was spectacular. Lena giggled softly and playfully pushed him away. Get your mind back on the job, Jerry. Grinning, Jerry turned his focus back to Scoop, guiding the drone into the air. It hummed softly as it lifted off, heading toward the lake, ready to capture whatever secrets the woods and water might hold. Alex and Marissa continued their hike, the dense woods surrounding them on all sides. The sound of leaves crunching underfoot was the only noise breaking the morning quiet. As they moved deeper into the forest, Marissa squinted, spotting something off in the distance, a figure on a path above them. Before she could get a clear look, the person disappeared from sight. I saw someone, Marissa said, her voice tinged with curiosity. Another hiker, most likely, Alex replied, glancing up the path. Yeah, I suppose so, Marissa agreed, though she couldn't shake the strange feeling it gave her. They kept walking, the moment fading into the background, as they began chatting about Marissa's past research. You know, Marissa said, back when I was looking into lake cryptids for this documentary, I found so many reports that were just hoaxes, but there were a few that stuck with me. Stories that didn't quite add up, but also couldn't be dismissed. Alex nodded, interested. Like what? Like a case in Canada, Marissa continued. Locals swore they saw something in the lake, and while no one could prove it, the consistency in their descriptions was eerie, almost like they were all seeing the same thing, but from different angles. As they talked, the forest seemed to grow quieter around them, the thick canopy above blocking out most of the sunlight. They kept moving, the conversation carrying them forward as the lake's main channel drew closer. As they walked down the path and rounded a bend, they suddenly came face to face with Ray emerging from the woods. A handgun was holstered at his side. He sneered, "Well, well, what do we have here? A dork and a tasty little treat." Alex and Marissa froze, exchanging uneasy glances. They both noticed the gun at Ray's side and quickly turned to retreat. But as they did, Frank stepped out of the woods behind them, a shotgun resting in his hands. He smirked and said, "Going somewhere, dork?" Marissa, her voice steady despite the fear, asked, "Did you follow us?" Ray grinned, his eyes narrowing. "You're a smart cookie, huh?" Alex stepped forward, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's your deal? What do you want from us?" Frank sneered. "We want it all. And to start, we'll take those cameras you're carrying." Reluctantly, Marissa handed her camera to Ray, while Alex passed his video camera to Frank. "There," Marissa said, her voice sharp. "Take them and go." But Ray and Frank only smirked at her defiance. "Oh, we're not done yet," Frank said, his voice dripping with malice. Ray stepped closer to Marissa, his eyes gleaming with something dark. Before she could react, he reached out, grabbed her shirt, and ripped it open, sending the buttons flying. Her front was exposed, except for a silky white bra that only seemed to encourage their leers. Frank and Ray stepped back, their eyes locked on Marissa, twisted smiles on their faces. Frank smiled. "Yum! Look at that sweet little treat." Alex, his anger boiling over, demanded, "Stop this!" He moved toward Ray, but Frank quickly raised his shotgun, aiming it directly at him. Frank warned, his voice cold. "You stay right where you are, boy." Alex froze, his heart pounding. He knew any sudden move could be disastrous, not just for him, but for Marissa as well. Ray moved behind Marissa, grabbing her arms and yanking them back roughly. With a cruel smirk, he secured her wrists together using a long zip tie, pulling it tight. Leaning in close, he whispered in her ear, "Oh, you're going to be a real sweet little tart later on tonight." Marissa recoiled, trying to pull her head away, feeling a wave of nausea at the thought. Frank, still holding the shotgun steady, looked at Ray and barked, "Now get him, and don't forget to take their phones after." As Ray began to move away from Marissa and toward Alex, a soft, smooth humming sound filled the air, coming from above the trees to the north. All four of them instinctively looked up, spotting a mid-sized black drone with the word "Scoop" displayed on each side, heading straight toward them. Alex's heart leapt. "Scoop!" Frank and Ray immediately stepped back from Alex and Marissa, realizing the drone could see everything and was likely recording. Frank quickly hid his shotgun behind his back, trying to conceal it from the drone's camera. Seizing the opportunity, Alex knew they were safe as long as they were being watched. He quickly moved forward, grabbing Marissa's arm and leading her away down the path. Frank and Ray stood still, doing their best to appear non-threatening as the drone hovered above, capturing every detail of the scene. Alex and Marissa hurried down the path until Frank and Ray were out of sight. Once they felt safe, Alex stopped and Marissa paused beside him. Reaching into his front pocket, Alex pulled out a foldable pocket knife and carefully cut the zip tie from Marissa's wrists. "Thanks," she said, rubbing her wrists. She then tied her shirt in a midriff style. "This path leads to the lake's main channel. There are probably people there. We'll be safe around others." Alex nodded, but asked, "How far?" "I'm not sure," Marissa replied, "but it shouldn't be too much farther." She then takes out her phone and sends a quick text to Lena. "Good," Alex said, determination in his voice. "Let's keep going." They quickly resumed walking, picking up the pace as they made their way down the path, hoping to reach safety soon. Back at the RV, Jerry watched the drone's live feed in disbelief at what he was witnessing. His heart raced as he lowered the drone closer to Frank and Ray, zooming in to capture perfect footage of their faces. Ray, looking panicked, asked, "What now?" Frank, his face twisted with frustration, replied, "Damn it, guess we're going to plan B." He then brought the shotgun from behind his back, aimed it at Scoop, and fired. The blast hit the drone, shattering it into pieces. Jerry jumped back, exclaiming, "Jesus!" Lena, hearing the commotion, ran up to Jerry, her face pale with worry. "I just got a text from Marissa. It said green submarine." The words sent a chill down Jerry's spine. Green submarine was the team's emergency code, a signal that they were in serious danger and needed police or rescue immediately. Jerry turned to Lena, frantic. "Call Sheriff Carter now." Back in the forest, Ray started to panic again. "They're going to go to the sheriff with this," he muttered, his voice shaky. But Frank, always the one to take charge, grabbed Ray by the shoulder. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "We've got this. They don't know these woods like we do. They'll stick to the path until they reach the lake, and that'll take them some time. You know as well as I do that you can cut through the woods, pass by the big boulder, go down the small hill, and be at the lake in no time, long before they get there, even with their head start." Frank's words started to calm Ray, who nodded as Frank continued. "I'll go after them. You head back to the truck and drive over to the park where their RV is. Do whatever you have to do to get that other geek and the redhead. Bring them back to the house. Once you have them, I'll have these too. We'll get rid of the guys and lock those two tarts in the basement. After dark, we'll take their RV and all that high-tech gear. It's worth a small fortune. By midnight tonight, we'll have all their stuff and those two hot pieces of ass to do whatever we want with." Ray, now more composed and fueled by Frank's plan, replied, "Okay, yeah, I got this." "Good," Frank said, a sinister smile on his face. "Now let's get moving." Ray turned and headed back through the woods toward the truck, while Frank continued down the path, then veered off to the left, cutting through the woods toward the big boulder. At the park, Jerry and Lena waited anxiously for Sheriff Carter. After about 10 tense minutes, a police SUV pulled up. They rushed over to the sheriff, quickly explaining everything that had happened. Sheriff Carter held up a hand to calm them. "Take a breath," he said. Jerry, still frantic, added, "I'm tracking their phones by GPS. I know their location." The sheriff nodded, his expression serious. "Good. Get in the back and we'll head that way. Keep tracking their phones." Jerry and Lena jumped into the back seat, and the SUV took off quickly, blue lights flashing as they sped toward their friends. Alex and Marissa finally reached the end of the path, emerging from the woods onto the bank of the lake's main channel. The main channel stretched out wide before them, but as they looked around, the only people in sight were far down at the other end of the lake, near the boat dock and picnic area. Alex turned to Marissa, urgency in his voice. "We've got to get to the boat dock." Without wasting a moment, they quickly started walking toward the boat dock. Just as Alex and Marissa began walking, they heard a rustling in the woods. Suddenly, Frank emerged from the trees, stepping onto the lake bank just ahead of them, shotgun in hand. He cut them off, forcing them to stop in their tracks. Frank approached with a cold grin, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Very predictable," he sneered. "I knew you'd stay on the path." Alex and Marissa hesitated, glancing toward the woods, considering their options. But as they started to inch away, Frank quickly raised the shotgun, holding it low by his waist. "Oh, no," he warned, his voice hard. "You stay right where you are." He maneuvered himself directly in front of them, positioning his back to the water and theirs to the woods. "You got lucky back there with the drone," Frank said, his tone darkening, "but your luck has run out." Alex, trying to keep his voice steady, asked, "What do you plan on doing with us?" Frank's eyes narrowed as he replied, "I plan on ending you, but I have other ideas for her." Marissa, trying to stay calm, said, "You know people will miss us. They'll come looking." Frank smirked. "Your two friends back at the park? I don't think so. Ray's taking care of them right now. Don't worry, princess. I've got a nice little spot in my basement for you. And your redhead friend will be joining you there soon enough." Alex, his anger rising, shot back. "The townspeople will notice we're not around." Frank laughed, a dark, mocking sound. "A group of outsiders here looking for a sea monster?" He rolled his eyes. "After we take that RV, they'll think you all couldn't find anything and just left town in the middle of the night." Marissa tried to protest. "People we know outside of this town," but Frank cut her off with a loud, harsh voice. "Shut up, bitch. I'll have time for you later, but right now, it's back to business. I think I'll get rid of the geek now before he can cause me any trouble. I'll come back to clean up the evidence after dark." Just as Frank was about to bring his shotgun to his shoulder, a thunderous splash erupted from the water behind him, slightly to his right. In an instant, a massive black sea creature with a long tail and spikes running down its back surged out of the lake. The beast thrust toward Frank with terrifying speed, its head tilted slightly, mouth wide open, and letting out a bone-chilling growl. Before Frank could react, the creature clamped its enormous jaws around him, its knife-like teeth sinking deep into his flesh. Frank's scream of terror and pain echoed through the air. Alex and Marissa, shocked and horrified, instinctively jumped back, both of them stumbling and falling to the ground. The gruesome sounds of bones breaking and flesh tearing filled the air as the creature twisted its head violently, slamming Frank to the ground with such force that his body folded in half. The monstrous beast then swung its massive tail in a wide arc, narrowly missing Alex, as it turned in a 180-degree motion. With Frank still in its jaws, the creature shot back into the water, leaving a trail of red as the lake churned with blood. The horrifying sounds of crushing bones and tearing flesh continued for what felt like an eternity, but within less than a minute, the mighty sea beast had devoured Frank entirely and disappeared back into the dark depths of the lake. Alex and Marissa stared at each other in utter disbelief. Marissa slowly stood up, her eyes locked on the dark, blood-stained water. Almost as if in a trance, she began walking toward it. Alex, his voice trembling with fear, called out, "Don't get too close! It might still be around." Marissa took a couple more steps before stopping. Alex quickly caught up to her, and together they stood at the water's edge, staring out at the lake in stunned silence. Finally, Alex broke the silence. "The legend of Murky is real." Marissa, still struggling to comprehend what she had just witnessed, replied, "That was the most incredible and terrifying thing I've ever seen." Alex nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Let's get to the boat dock." As they were about to turn, Marissa paused, her gaze fixed on the blood floating on the water. In a voice tinged with coldness, she murmured, "I guess it was you who turned out to be the sweet little treat." Alex glanced at her, unsure how to respond. Without another word, they started walking toward the boat dock. As Alex and Marissa reached the boat dock, Sheriff Carter's SUV came speeding up the road that led to the lake. Jerry and Lena were out of the vehicle in an instant, rushing to meet them. Without hesitation, they began recounting everything that had happened to Sheriff Carter, their voices still shaken from the ordeal. Just as they finished recounting the events, Sheriff Carter's police radio crackled to life. "Sheriff Carter, you out there?" came the voice of Deputy Lewis. Carter grabbed the radio and responded. "Go ahead, Lewis. You have that YouTube group with you?" Lewis asked. "Yes, we're out at the lake by the boat dock. Something went down with Frank Hull," the sheriff replied, his tone tense. Lewis's voice came back over the radio. "We've got his partner in crime, Ray Sutton, in custody. He was trying to break into their RV. Little Lily Atkins saw him trying to open a window from the outside. Her mother called it in. I was nearby and got there within a few minutes. Caught him in the act of trying to jimmy open the front door with a crowbar." Sheriff Carter closed his eyes, shaking his head in disbelief. "What an idiot, Lewis. You still at the station?" "Yes, sir," Lewis responded. "Put Kim on, will you?" Carter requested. A moment later, a female voice came over the radio. "Sheriff, Kim here. Go ahead." "Kim, I need you to send Deputy Powell and Deputy Crawford to my location. Then get in touch with Bill Franklin over at Fish and Wildlife and have him come out as well," Sheriff Carter instructed. 10-4, Sheriff. I'm on it now," Kim replied. "Over and out," Carter said, ending the transmission. Sheriff Carter drove the group back to their RV, his face a mix of skepticism and concern. As they pulled up, he turned to them and said, "I'm not fully buying this murky story, but until we get everything sorted out, I'd advise you not to leave town." Over the next couple of days, the team, along with the Fish and Wildlife Department, scoured the lake, searching tirelessly for any sign of the legendary creature. They combed through every inch of the water, but despite their best efforts, they found nothing, not a ripple, not a trace of the massive beast that had so violently emerged from the depths. It was as if Murky had never existed at all. On the morning of the third day, the group was sitting around the picnic table, finishing breakfast, when Sheriff Carter's SUV pulled up. Sheriff Carter and Bill Franklin from Fish and Wildlife approached them. "Good morning," Carter greeted. "Good morning, Sheriff," they replied in unison. Sheriff Carter got straight to the point. "A couple of hours ago, we found Frank's shotgun a few yards into the water where the attack happened. The butt end of the gun was bitten clean in half, with large teeth marks on it," Bill Franklin added. "The bite marks look a lot like those from a crocodile." Alex shook his head emphatically. "It was no crocodile, I promise you that." Sheriff Carter raised an eyebrow, but continued, "Well, regardless, it seems your story checks out. There's no need to keep you here any longer. You're free to go whenever you're ready." Marissa, still puzzled, asked, "But how would a crocodile even get in the lake in the first place?" Bill explained. "There are underground tunnels beneath the lake's bed that connect to the ocean. It's extremely rare for a crocodile to travel that far and end up in a lake, but it's happened before in other places." Lena, curious, asked, "And what about Ray?" Sheriff Carter's expression darkened. "Well, after hearing your story and reviewing the drone footage, we got a search warrant for the house where Frank and Ray were living. We found an ID and a few other personal items belonging to a girl who went missing about a year and a half ago over in Hot Springs, about 30 miles northeast of here. Seems old Ray has a lot of explaining to do. Anyways, you folks have a good day. Sheriff Carter and Bill Franklin turned and began walking back to the police SUV. As they did, Carter shook his head and muttered, "Murky." Bill glanced over at him, a grin spreading across his face. As the group remained gathered around the picnic table, they began discussing their next move. Lena asked, "Should we stay and keep searching?" Alex stated, "You heard Bill from Fish and Wildlife. If there are tunnels leading to the ocean, I'd imagine Murky is long gone by now." Jerry chimed in, "I suggest we do the same." Alex nodded. "The tunnels would explain why no one can ever find Murky. He comes into the lake for a while, then disappears back into the Atlantic whenever he pleases." With that, the team decided they had all they needed for their next documentary. With Murky likely gone, there was no reason to stay any longer. They packed up their gear and loaded it into the RV, ready to leave town. As Alex pulled the RV out of the park, heading in the opposite direction from how they came into town, Jerry sat in the back, leaning back in a chair, while Lena stretched out on the couch. Marissa, sitting in the front seat next to Alex, rested her head against the window, reflecting on the events of the past few days. As they passed a modest house just to the left of the park, she noticed Tommy and Lily playing fetch with a white and brown dog in the front yard. The kids looked up at the RV, waving and smiling. Marissa smiled back and waved with just her fingers. As Alex drove the RV through town and neared the edge, he spotted Mrs. Dunham sitting on a bench outside a market, a cup of ice cream in her hand. She glared at the RV as it passed by, a slightly sinister grin curling on her face. Alex glanced at her for a moment, then quickly turned his attention back to the road. He pressed the gas pedal a bit more firmly, speeding the RV up as they zoomed out of town, passing a large wooden sign that read, "Now leaving Blackwater Cove. Hope you enjoyed your stay."
Looks like someone needs to give Ray a lesson on how windows work. What did you think of this episode? If you liked it, smash that thumbs up. If not, the dislike button's there too. That's it for this episode. See you next time.